Hi, I'm Mike Day and welcome to the Third Party Therapy Podcast. My guest today is someone I've been working with for a number of years. He used to be one of us, used to be a TPRM manager, but has recently joined Helios as the managing director. He's got some great insights into the evolution of TPRM over the last few years, and with his new role, he's got some really good insights into community due diligence and what that can bring both now and moving forwards. I'm really pleased to welcome Paul Huggett to the Third Party Therapy Podcast. Paul, thank you very much for joining the Third Party Therapy Podcast today.
I'm delighted to be here, Mike.
You and I have worked closely together for a number of years, both while you were TPRM lead and also since you joined Helios. I've been really keen to get your views on community due diligence and the wider third-party space. But before we dive into that, can we just start with you giving us a view of how you got into all of this in the first place and how you got here?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Well, it's kind of a long and checkered history, so I'll keep it brief, otherwise we'll run out of time. I started way back in financial services in the early 90s as a graduate, and I did a number of roles over a few years for a lot of different companies doing operational work, and then got into project management, IT project management, program management, and then just through a twist of fate, through a finishing an IT project and being sort of spare in a big firm, was asked to pick up an outsourcing project. So became an outsourcing project manager, I guess in TPR terms, became something of a poacher. How do you get stuff done quick? How do you move functions from one part of the world to the other? And at that time, procurement were just a blocker. They were just in the way. We didn't really have TPR people that you dealt with. Anyway, after doing that for a number of years, I found myself Lloyds Banking Group in a role of as a head of audit, looking after the sourcing function and the property function at the time. Never done any risk audit activity before, but Lloyds were looking for a poacher that they could convert into a gamekeeper. Being a head of audit is fantastic because it's actually like running a series of projects, although you do quickly realise that nobody wants to deal with an auditor. You're never that popular, as you can imagine. Anyway, after a couple of years, finding a few things, working closely with the CPO, I think he got a bit annoyed that I was finding too much stuff and essentially offered me a job. Cross sites, go from third line of defence to first line of defence, and help prevent some of these things popping up in the first place. So that's what I did. I went native and started my 10-year journey as a head of third-party risk. Now, the job titles have been different in lots of different companies, but essentially it's TPR. So yeah, 3 roles in TPR, Lloyds Banking Group, then at Bank of Ireland, and most recently at Nationwide Building Society before I came here. And of course, at all 3 roles, been working as a customer of Helios, and the FSQS scheme, a community scheme we've got, which we'll talk about later. And I joke when I talk to people that after putting Helios in at 3 different firms, the small print of the contract offers you a job. So here I am. I spoke to the CEO about a year and a half ago, and was looking for someone to come in and run the UK business, and I accepted. So here I am.
How have you seen? You said when you started that first outsourcing role, there wasn't really such a thing as a third-party risk person, at least in the organisation at the time. How have you seen that broader world of third-party risk change over that period since you've been involved in it?
I think the thing that sticks in my mind is when I first started as a head of audit, I remember doing one of my first audits was supplier management, and going to a procurement team and saying, what due diligence do you do? How do you know that this supplier is doing things in the right way? And the answer was, well, I have a letter from them that tells me they are. And I was shown a bit of paper from a certain supplier that said, dear buyer, everything's fine. Thank you. And that was it. I think things have moved on quite a bit since then. Now, just a touch. But obviously, from the other side of the fence, when we were starting out in this journey, we were really only dealing with a paragraph, CISC 8.1, which had 4 or 5 bullet points that says if you're outsourcing something, you need to make sure that you're doing it well. You can't outsource the risk, and be careful out there. Essentially, it didn't really say very much. So it really boomed. Probably 2015, 2018, GDPR, cloud outsourcing regs, the European regulator kind of waking up to that, and there was a big flurry of stuff around that time, which caused a lot of interest, and the emergence of cloud caused a lot of focus. The emergence of cyber and security is a much bigger risk. Conduct risk became a thing which was never really considered. I think externally it was more of an internal problem, but as outsourcing grew in prevalence and stuff was moved to different parts of the world, customer outcomes, complaint handling became a big thing. And then, of course, the UK regulator caught up with Europe, and we go into 221 and 121. And sort of the league table of risks that were considered important has not only grown but has been restacked over the 10 years with topics like ESG or CSR, as it used to be back when I started, have gone from almost at the bottom of the pile as an afterthought to really quite near the top as people have woken up to the environmental concerns and other concerns that exist. So it's completely changed. And if I go back and talk to myself of 10, 12 years ago, I don't think I'd recognise some of the words I would say, and I certainly wouldn't recognise half of the jargon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think there's been that combination of regulatory and legal wake up, those external factors as well that have really focused people's minds on supply chain, like Brexit, like COVID. Within the finance industry, that TSB outage that was in 2016, 2017, I think it was, that really made the regulators and the government wake up to the fact that these technical solutions that banks and finance industries are buying are interacting directly with the customers, and therefore if they go down, the customer's affected. So it's been a huge change over the period, and it's still changing, and we'll come back to that in a minute, because I know there's the regulatory landscape, the risk landscape is a challenge today, and will continue to be driving us in various directions moving forwards. Just bring it back to the pooled community, the community approach that we've been talking about, that we're getting to the topic. You've been, as you said, a customer of Helios FSQS for a number of years. I think you were one of the founding members, I believe, right back at the beginning.
I've got a badge somewhere that says that. Yeah.
I think if you look, before we look at how that changed, can we just pause a second and take a step back and say, pooled due diligence, community due diligence, what actually is it? How would you describe it if you were sort of introducing it to somebody who'd never come across the concept before?
Yeah, okay. I think it goes back to the growth in the requirements in the due diligence world is exploded in terms of what buyers of services need. So, the traditional way of doing this is that every buyer of every service writes out to each of their suppliers individually and asks their questions. So you've got this sort of many-to-many mesh of interactions going on, a whole sort of cat's cradle, spider's web, whatever you want to call it, of all of the buyers asking all of the suppliers everything constantly. And from a Helios point of view, our view of the market, and the reason I was interested as a buyer was that that's just waste. Nobody needs to know all of that stuff all of the time in a bespoke way. Not, if only the market would support a single set of data that all buyers could then use. That was kind of the start point. So you could create a question set that buyers of services could align behind, a standard, if you like, that would incorporate other standards like ISOs and the like, that then would give them a place to go to get the data. But I guess equally importantly, that suppliers could spend more time delivering their services and less time answering questionnaires from all of their buyers. So the community model was about getting information once from a supplier and presenting it out to buyers in a format that works for them and checking that it's good quality. And the win is that suppliers only do this once. They answer one questionnaire, and that's made available to all of the buyers that we work with. And of course, from a buyer point of view, they are able to dip into a pool of a supplier community, and they can already see suppliers there which are provided all their data that they may not currently use but want to use. So it gets their procurement process, or it speeds up their procurement process. It gives them a fast start. They don't have to go out and ask for all the information again. So it's really rather than having a many-to-many model, it's a one-to-many model. It saves time and energy for both buyer and supplier, but without compromising on the data that we capture.
Absolutely. So I remember when I first dipped my toe into TPRM back in 2009, I think it was, post the financial crash, and it was the era of lots of spreadsheets going everywhere, and that remember that conversation between peer banks at the time that said, "Wouldn't it be great if one person collected all of this and we could share it?" And at that time, the industry was just so immature that it just didn't exist. So, we're really only talking about the last sort of 10 years since this has existed and evolved. How have you seen the adoption and the sort of the use of pooled and community due diligence change over that time? Is it something that is becoming more acceptable, more common, or is it something that is still, should we say, a bit more on the outside of the general thinking?
I think it's definitely much more, for want of a better word, mainstream, I guess. Whereas as buyer one, we were very much out on our own. At Lloyds Banking Group, when we started on this, we were the only one who was prepared to take the plunge. So the community at that time was one buying firm, which kind of makes it hard yards to convince suppliers to sign up. Now, over the years, we've grown and we've got just short of 70 UK buying firms and another sort of 20 around Europe in different locations. So the model has grown and it's cross-border now as well. But to answer your question, I think the demands placed upon buying firms by the regulators and by their own internal risk and compliance teams have really driven people to look for efficient ways of doing this. It's not sustainable to gather the level of information that people need and do it in that many-to-many way. It just isn't sustainable. It's just deeply inefficient and it costs an absolute fortune to resource and to manage. Not just from an onboarding due diligence, from a procurement life cycle, it slows everything down. It acts like a business blocker. But the requirement now for ongoing due diligence, for keeping that data up to date, is a huge time sink for buying organisations. And as you know, as someone who's been in the industry as long as me, you never get, as a TPR person, someone come to you and say, "Oh, Mike, would you like some more people? And would you like some more budget? Would that be okay?" It's always the opposite. So this constant kind of pressure on margins, constant drive for efficiency has really helped the market shift towards a shared pooled model, shared assurance model. I think there was also a bit of a breakthrough in some of the European regulation back sort of 2018, 2019, when it was the first time when the shared assurance was referenced as being acceptable, provided that the recipient of the shared assurance was able to take ownership and apply their own appetite to the results. So you couldn't just outsource everything, but you could use it. That was a bit of a breakthrough moment, because prior to that, people were very nervous about, was it even allowed? Would the regulator even be happy? Now, we're quite lucky that we had the back of house of the two UK regulators using our tool as well. But very clearly, that's not front of house. That's different. That's not the supervisory teams. But that really opened it up. And like I say, we have 70 odd UK firms using this, from tiny little provincial building societies through to big international investment banks, all with the same challenge, but also I guess we'll get to this slightly different challenges, but all making use of it.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I've also seen just on that one, and you're right, the reference to it in the regulations was a big change. I think as well, you saw some of the narrative coming out of UK regulators that they're very conscious of the burden that a lot of this places on the supplier, and wherever possible, avoiding multiple duplicative approaches to supplier is a good thing. And I think it might be the policy document or one of the other documents. They actually reference pooled due diligence as a technique that can be looked at. And you're absolutely right that it doesn't take away any responsibility from the consuming entities to make sure that they're making the right decisions and things like that. But as a coordination method, it's becoming more, as you say, mainstream on there. But I think there's still a lot of companies out there that look at it cautiously, look at it from as a risk, or maybe not as a risk, but more of a just trying to understand the value that it actually brings. And you touched on there about smaller organizations and larger organizations. Now, obviously, your background is working for a number of large banks and building societies. Do you see a huge difference in the way that pooled due diligence is used between those small companies and the larger ones?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the trigger point for lots of our engagement is normally some sort of problem, some sort of crisis, or sometimes a regulatory intervention. So the start point for each of our buyers is often quite different. And from personal experience, the trigger point for me getting the roles that I've had and building the teams that I've been able to build, and also I guess implementing FSQS has been different each time. So I'm not going to give examples because I'd get shot by my former employers, but yeah, everyone focuses on the most recent crisis, most recent problem they've had. So that's one factor, and they've changed over time. So be it 121 readiness or 221 readiness, or a cyber event or a resilience issue, and so on. That's a key factor. But generally, if allow me to generalize a touch, big firms have capability. They're already gathering data. They already have pretty stable, mature procurement platforms or processes in place, and they're normally very good at understanding their most important suppliers and the most critical stuff. But where they're struggling is how do they get that broader reach and really get a better understanding across all of their third parties without having to invest extra resource. So they've got a reach and a breadth challenge, which they can't afford to do on their own. Smaller firms generally don't have anything in play other than some good spreadsheets. So they're looking for a tool that gives them a fast start and gives them a much better view of everything that they do. So a smaller buyer would normally come to us, and we find that we've actually got most of their key suppliers in our community already. So from day one, they make a massive leap forward. Whereas our larger buyers, that we've got that coverage as well, but they bring more of their smaller suppliers, which probably a fewer number of buyers use to the community. The community grows, everyone wins. But it is there's no set individual reason why people come to play, but generally I'd say it's efficiency, it's capacity, because we provide the extra capacity that they can't afford to build or pay for themselves.
So for those smaller organisations, it's almost like due diligence in a box that they can sort of tap into and be able to make a huge step forward in terms of protecting the risk and compliance with the regs. But I think it's also important to understand that pooled due diligence on its own is not a silver bullet. It's not. It's a big part of the jigsaw, but it's not the be all and end all of everything, is it? There's other elements that have to be overlaid.
There's no one there's no one platform out there in the market or system or anything like that does everything. Uh, Despite what many salespeople or business development teams will try and tell you, or help you shape your thinking to understand, which is always my favourite phrase. Will help you shape your thinking. Um, no, we as a firm play nice within a TPR kind of ecosystem, right? And what we give as part of that ecosystem is quality data straight from the supplier. So it's primary data. We don't scrape it. We don't pull it and blend it. Right? We get it from the source. So as a buyer, what you're getting is data that you can trust. So that's the first thing. They're getting a coverage and a set of data which probably they didn't have before, which is great, which gives them a really good leg up on the process. They've still got to apply their appetite, work out what's important to them. But the other interesting angle is that because our questions aren't set by us, they're set by the buying community, as you know. Buyers come to us and say, we want to ask the following questions. We don't care about that question anymore, but we want to ask 5 more questions here. We take that in from all of our members and we blend that into a question set, which is effectively set by the industry for the industry. Now, if you're a new buyer coming to join the community and you're not even sure what you should be asking, that's absolute gold dust, because not only have you got the data, but you've got that decades worth of risk and compliance insight from all these other firms brought to bear on a question set. So you can take that to your board and say, we know we're asking the right stuff because insert, other company name here or peer firm here. That's good enough for them and them and them and them. Therefore, we believe that data set's good enough for us. And actually, it helps them deduplicate or remove some of the waste that they might be creating through specialist teams, cyber teams, resilience teams, conduct teams, ESG teams, going out independently and asking questions which have already got the answers to. So one of the key use cases for us is saying to buyers, you don't have to ask these 12 different question sets for each of your suppliers because it's all in one place now. So you can free up not just capacity in procurement and TPR, but you can free up capacity in your CISO's world, in your resilience director's world, and in your ESG team's world. And you can spend more time getting to the so what with the data. To your point, we give you the information, but your job is to decide what to do with it. So we like to talk to people about how we can take people off of low value administrative activity, chasing, checking, publishing data, and repoint people to the sharp end of the process. So the exciting stuff is just what you're going to do with it. What difference are you going to make?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an important distinction to make that, whether or not it's your solution or one of the other solutions out there on the market, they're all about the information gathering and presentation. It doesn't take away from the fact that it's the consuming organization's responsibility to make the risk call, work out what's good, bad, indifferent to what they care about, and to consume that data in a certain way. We talked about the model being, you're collecting this information from the suppliers, you're sharing it with upwards of 70 odd financial organizations at the moment. One of the things often, or the couple of things often get thrown out here, one is confidentiality of data, and the other one is competition law. Are we, how do we stay the right side of both of those to maximize the efficiency, but not be seen as, organizations colluding against suppliers or, breaching confidentiality? Because there is some, data that's in here which could be seen as confidential in terms of the presence or not of certain controls, or whether or not they do training or whatever.
Yeah.
So how do you stay the right side of that and cover that bit off?
Well, we are a supplier to all of our buyers as well. So we follow our own process. We don't take ourselves out of your due diligence activity. So as a small firm, and we are a small firm, we meet ISO standards. We have Cyber Essentials Plus. We have all the right cyber frameworks and cyber controls in place. We take the protection of the data we gather from suppliers very seriously. We work in financial services. We also work in defence. So you can imagine there's no quarter given for poor data management, for poor cybersecurity with either of those sectors. We take it incredibly seriously. So from a protection point of view, with our suppliers' data for our buyers, we are operating to the high standards, and we operate to the level that each of our buyers expect. The confidentiality question often comes from suppliers who are willing or unwilling, rather, to share certain policy documents. They don't want to share their cybersecurity policy with us or actually with anyone because they believe that sharing that policy puts their controls in the shop window, and there's a fear that if you're sharing the controls, you're making it easier to circumvent them, right? That challenge is no different from the challenge that you would have if you ran out directly. So what we do, we offer the suppliers an option to say that they have certain documentation, but not to upload it through our tool. And then so we say to the buyer, they're telling us they have it, you can go and get it directly. What we do, however, is each of our question set is structured in a similar way for each risk domain, and that we ask about the presence of key policies and procedures or external certification. If a supplier is saying they have an external certification or an insurance cert or an ISO or whatever, they have to provide it. We check that, we validate that externally, we look at the document itself. That's important stuff. If they're saying I have a resilience policy, but I'm not prepared to share it because I don't want to share these controls, we say that's fine, tell us you have it, but then for each section we break down the contents of that document. So we're asking very structured questions, always structured data, never free text, about the presence of key controls within that policy. And again, that's set by the buyers. So even if you haven't actually got the document in front of you, the data is structured in such a way that your risk SME on the buyer side can look at it and say, right, I need these 15 things. Out of the 20 questions that we ask, a buyer may only need 15 of those. Of those 15, they have 13. They don't have these two. Therefore, I'll get to the sharp end and go straight to those two on a follow-up call. So it's about getting that risk SME and getting the buyer to the stuff, the exceptional stuff, the stuff that matters, rather than them sitting there ticking through a document which you may have. So that's confidentiality. I think that's never going to go away, and it comes down to buyer and supplier appetites for sharing different documentation. The competition law one, we are very mindful of. We're very careful on. We don't share anywhere who is working for who. So which buyer and supplier relationships. A buyer can see who their suppliers are in our tool, but they cannot see anyone else's relationships, right? And that's very, very important. So you couldn't look into our supplier community and infer in any way who is working for who. Only the buyer can see that. So that's a key thing. The other thing is that, and you'll know this from being a member of the community over the last few years, when we're talking about the supplier community, we talk about it as a collective. We never talk about an individual supplier being a problem or positive or anything at all, right? We never direct our buyers to take any action on suppliers because that would be anti-competitive.
That's really good. That's good, because I know that's often when a supplier is putting data into a portal that multiple people are accessing, that's often one of the key concerns that they actually they have. And I think one of the, just extending that a little bit, is also, you've got 70 odd buyers in there. Joe Bloggs, the suppliers coming along, and they're only working with 4 of them. So I think there's also that concern from them that they're effectively giving all of this information to 65 odd companies that they have no trading relationship. Now, they might want a trading relationship with them in the future, and there is that side, but they've also that concern. I think that's something to be mindful of when communicating with suppliers. To your point, they are in control of the data they put in there, and it needs to be done that way.
Yeah. And we're not. Let's be clear. We're not capturing data about their commercials. We're not putting them painting them in any sort of light in terms of the price point. This is corporate level stuff, and we're not, to my earlier point, we're part of an ecosystem. So we play well and we play best when we're part of a sourcing process, but we're not there to replace the whole sort of tender engine or any auction activity or anything like that. Well, we feed into that. So yeah, suppliers should view it really as if they're serving 5 of the 70, Mike, they should view it as they're in the shop window for the other 65.
Um, yeah. Can I just pick up on something that you just talked about there? You said that you're working with both the defence and the finance industry. Do you see, a big difference in the way they're approaching these topics? Do you see similar challenges and similar solutions in there at all?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. I mean, I'm still learning about the defence community from in the last year. The core model we operate is exactly the same as the community model. All the things we talked about apply equally. The question set is broadly the same, although there are greater areas of focus on things like health and safety, sort of manufacturing, import, export. It's a much more tangible goods sector than financial services. So as you'd expect, the questions skew more into those risk areas. But data, cyber, resilience, all of the key topics, ESG, all the things that financial services would care about, defence care about equally. I think the interesting difference for me within defence is that certainly within the UK, there is one ultimate customer of everything that is produced across the sector, which is the Ministry of Defence. And that's the same in any country around the world. There's ultimately one customer. And they are able to set a tone and set expectations as the equivalent of, say, the PRA would in finance. The difference is that in defence, there's a much stronger stance taken, and everyone very quickly shifts if the ultimate customer says they need something or want something. So ESG is a very good example. There's a much stronger mindset in defence around sustainability and environmental concerns and carbon emissions than there actually is in finance, which is really shocked me, actually, because it's much more ingrained into the way things have to be done, the way things should be done as part of the core process. But no, we operate in the same way, and just with finance, the defence model we've recently set up in Australia. So it can be literally other side of the world, same community model, same sector, different location, and it works. And we've had fantastic take up. So community works is what I get across different sectors, and jargon. Some slight nuances aside, they're essentially TPR is TPR is what I'm picking up.
So, Paul, we've talked earlier about some of the events that have happened in the past, and you mentioned Brexit, Russia, Ukraine. We've also had things like Israel and Gaza, and COVID, obviously. We've also had a number of things like breaches and vulnerabilities that have had to be addressed by the corporate world. How have you seen those affect or be reacted to by the pool due diligence space? Is that something that there's been value add through participation in that sort of program?
Yeah, it's a good one because I've seen it from both sides of the fence. I mean, I still view myself sometimes as a captive buyer here at Helios, but certainly from something like let's take Russia, Ukraine. That caught everyone unawares. And understandably, everyone on board was asking their procurement and TPR people to get a sense of the exposure. Now, pre-Helios or firms that weren't in Helios, I think, were kind of going to their finance platforms and trying to work out from who they paid, where they were paying, who was exposed, and using that as a data point. Where being a member of the community really helps is that you've got that information there already. So you've got all of your suppliers, but you've got everyone else's suppliers. And we capture things like country of registration, city of registration, but also operating locations as well, and fourth party data. So at one of the buyers, when that landed, I was able to very quickly run a report with the help of my team now, actually, who were on the other side of the fence at the time, and get a very quick view about where my exposure was. And it didn't tell me exactly what was happening for each of those places, but it told me exactly where my in-scope population were and how many I had, and also what they did. And I could do that within half an hour. Now, as a board member, that delights you if you're getting that information back quite quickly. What we were then able to do from the Helios point of view was working with the Ministry of Defence, actually, and then into finance, create a set of follow-up questions which we hadn't previously asked of suppliers, but much more focused about the impact of Russia-Ukraine on not only Ukraine but on the surrounding countries, and that was able to be issued out within about 10 days to about 10,000 suppliers. 80% of whom answered very, very quickly. So not only have you got the core data about where your risk exposure is, you've got up-to-date information on impact on supply chains, on people, had they been victim of increased cyber activity, because obviously the war is fought in cyberspace as much as in the battlefield, and so on. So, really, really quickly, but the community gives you access when you need extra information, gives you access to a huge number of suppliers through one channel. So rather than, to my earlier point, rather than as a buyer, I'm sitting there as a head of TPR going, how do I quickly write out to my 1,500 suppliers? Well, the answer is, well, they also do it for me, and I can just take the data back. And we did that on Russia-Ukraine. We've done it on Israel-Gaza. We did it on rolling blackouts, and we've done it on some of the key cyber outages as well. So it's about gathering data quickly through a single channel, so that sort of one-to-many approach again, and then getting it back to you as a buyer as quickly as possible, so then you can get to that. So what? What did it tell me? What am I going to do?
I want to understand where you see this going as we move forward. So obviously, we've talked about the evolution of it, quite rapid evolution of this concept of community due diligence. I think in parallel to that, the evolution of the technology solutions to support it. We could only do this because we've got the platforms and the technology capability to send this out and to collect the information. We've got new technology coming in around AI. We've got things coming up, new regulations. Where do you see the future of community due diligence? What do you see is going to really benefit it, and what do you see the challenges being as we move forward?
I think let's start with AI, because it's a hot topic and everyone's talking about it. And if I had a pound for every event I've been invited to that's got AI in the title, I wouldn't be talking to you today, right? We view AI in a couple of different ways. Firstly, it's a supply chain risk. So we're currently, with our buyers, developing a follow-up set of questions that are going to dig much deeper into AI. AI at the moment is a bit like cloud was in sort of 2017, 2018. Everyone's talking about it, everyone's nervous, but no one's quite sure why or where they're exposed. So, the EU AI Act is actually quite sensible, and it takes a logical step of assessing the use of AI, coming out with a risk outcome, and then in proportional application of controls based on the level of risk. But of course, we've got to work out across your supply chain for you what level of risk each of your suppliers poses, how are they using it, and of course, if they're higher risk, what are they doing to ensure human oversight, data quality, data integrity, removal of bias, and so on. So they're the sort of things we'll be asking. So AI, from that sense, becomes another risk domain which will work its way, I'm sure, up the risk league table as ESG has over recent years. AI is not something as a supplier of data we are desperately keen to get into, because as I said before, we're about primary data from the source, which is checked carefully before we publish it. And there are an awful lot of other tools out there that do fantastic work, but they are scraping data and they are combining data. I went to an event not that long ago where one of the speakers was talking about how people will look back fondly on 2022 as the last year of clean AI. So what on earth does that mean? And the explanation was that the AI models, the large language models, have grown so quickly, and there's so many of them now, and the technology is so advanced that they can come to market really, really quickly. The trouble is, how do you train them? And we're now at the point where we're running the risk that these LLMs are being trained by other LLMs, or the data they're being trained on has been sourced from other places, which may include AI generated information. So, how do you make sure that your very well policed and built tool is actually not picked up some very bad habits and poor quality data from elsewhere? So we're not in a mad rush to implement AI at any scale, other than maybe investigate how it could help us pass large documentation, certification, things like that, and potentially a bit quicker. But even that's going to be very carefully done because we pride ourselves on the quality of the data we provide back to buyers. So that's definitely an area of growth. We also see increasingly concentration and resilience coming to the fore from the national regulator point of view. So from a UK PLC point of view, with the CTP regulation, and off the back of, I suppose, COVID, but also cyber attacks and just the consolidation of supply markets, the Treasury realizing that we've got lots of eggs in a small number of baskets and we have to do something about it. So we're in an interesting position as a provider of TPR data where we've got the government saying that they will directly assure some of these key suppliers. And some of the suppliers they're talking about are suppliers that have flat refused to give any due diligence information to any of our buyers, either directly or through us, because they are bigger than the nation state, right? They do things their way. So we're quite interested to see how that plays out, and if you put His Majesty's Treasury up against a big provider of, shall we say, core office software, who's going to win?
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure on that one.
And I think from your perspective, with that visibility of the data you've got across X thousands of suppliers and 70 plus buyers, you've got that visibility of where that finance sector concentration risk actually sits, because you're right, concentration risk is something that every financial organization is looking at, but from its own perspective. Where does that risk apply to us? The regulator is interested in that inherent risk to the finance sector by these companies. And you must have not complete visibility of that, but a view on that because you've got all of this data. Is that something that you're looking at all? I mean, is that a benefit that your organization could, or the concept of pool due diligence could actually bring at all?
It's a challenging one because, as you mentioned earlier, with sort of confidentiality and competition, we're very careful. We don't share our data. We don't sell our data to anyone other than the buyers who use our services, and we're not going to start doing that. We do help the regulator with identifying concentration in a very roundabout way. So the CTP view has driven a whole new load of reporting that the PRA and the FCA have demanded of buyers. As you'll know, the new improved outsourcing register, and I guess the equivalent in Europe with the DORA register as well is the same thing essentially, but with an ICT focus. But the structure and the level of detail that's now required on that has grown hugely over the last couple of years, and that is because the regulator's trying to work out from the buyers where the concentration lies. So they're asking the buyers, who do you use, but who do you use for what? And they're trying to take all this information and dedupe it to get their league table of greatest exposure. Now, we ran an event back in the spring with one of the key people at the PRA who drafted the CTP stuff. And their view on that call was that we'd have a very, very small number of these critical third parties to get the ball rolling, as small as like 4 or 5. So I don't think we're going to get a huge sway of CTP stuff coming down the track just now. It's not something that we can easily crack because we don't capture what you're using each supplier for. We know what they do, but what's critical for you as buyer A might be very different from what's critical for buyer B. As you know, we have insurance firms, reinsurers, building societies, banks, wealth managers, investment fund managers in our community. So they may all be using a certain supplier in very different ways. So I think that's something that really belongs to the buyer, but we're trying to do our best to support them by we provide canned reports, so you can click a button and we will give you everything that we've got on your suppliers in a PRA acceptable beads friendly format that you can upload, but we can't fill in the stuff that's yours for you on your services. But we give you the report with the gaps in and say, here's what we have, fill in the gaps.
Over to you. Yeah, absolutely. So just building on that conversation about where do you see pooled due diligence going? Do you see it, because you mentioned earlier about the increased pressures to look at more suppliers, to comply with more regulations? That doesn't necessarily come with an open blank check for new resources within an organization. So do you see more and more organizations turning to pooled due diligence to augment their existing practices? And do you also see companies who are also, because I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is there's a certain perception that everybody is up to speed and doing what we need to do today, and therefore the challenges are about looking forward about what we need to do. Do you still see organizations that are way behind? Organizations that struggle to actually even know what their inventory is today, who are playing catch up still, that would need to engage with?
Oh, absolutely. We have a whole spectrum, as I said earlier, a whole spectrum of buyers who are fine tuning and tweaking very mature frameworks through to people who come to us and say we're not quite sure who our suppliers are. And there's a long way to go. And FS as a sector it's got thousands of buying firms out there. So I think there's a long way. I mean, nobody is going to go to a conference or sit on the webinar panel and tell everyone else there how bad they are. Right? So you don't really get a sense of where the market's at through some of these events. People want to do a show and tell when they're in a good place or where they've improved. But there's definitely a long way to go. I do see the growth in regulation and the depth of data required driving people to look for more cost-effective solutions, because TPR is very worthwhile, but it's not revenue generating, right? It's not going to help a business grow. It's not going to fatten margins. So as a practitioner myself, the challenge is always, how can I get more done with the same or less? How can I get a broader coverage, and how can I get deeper understanding with what I've got already? So I think community models hit the mark on that, because you get a fast start you get access to a wider proportion of the market, not just your own. So from a procurement point of view, you can jump straight to the sharp end of the deal without having to wait for the due diligence to happen and spending time and energy on that. But you can spend less time gathering and checking data and far more time taking action, mitigating the risk with the same capacity. So I see the community model growing, and it's growing very well in markets where we've started recently, where we're working our way through the early adopters. I think the other thing that we're doing that's we think's got real opportunity for growth, and we see a real appetite for it from the supply side, is taking the community model a step further into assurance. So at the moment we gather data and we check it and we play it back to the buyers, but we don't score, we don't assess, we don't rate. We've started to do that with ESG data, which we gather, which has been a huge success for us. And we, for the first time, have given suppliers the ability to see how they are doing, but also how they compare against the peers. And we're still not a scoring, or we're definitely not a ratings firm, but we're using our data in a way that allows suppliers to see how they can improve. And we're suggesting actions based on the 150 odd ESG questions that we already asked. And our buyers are now starting to make better use of that, and with their growing ESG teams to make better informed decisions. And I guess for the first time ever, factor ESG properly into sourcing decisions, which I don't think's really happened until recently. And I guess finally, Mike, we're also getting into proper assurance work on a community basis. So we're at the start of this year have launched a new product where suppliers are paying for a virtual site visit, a proper test of some of these controls across the top 8 domains in that ops risk league table. And they're prepared to do that, and they're happy to do that because for them, from a supplier point of view, a pooled audit like that is hugely valuable. And we had a supplier talk to us recently and said that for every request for some assurance, and we're talking thousands of person hours of effort. Now, if you're a supplier and you're delivering to, say, even 10, 15 buyers in our community, that's a huge amount of effort that suppliers putting into just to do the basics, just to keep their buyers happy. Now, you may not care as a buyer until you realise that cost is probably being fed into your pricing. And we have suppliers that service 45 or more of our buyers. So one piece of work keeps a lot of people happy. So the resistance or the nervousness around pooled audits, pooled assurance, strangely comes more from the buying side of the fence than it does from the supply side. Because suppliers want to get on doing what they're paid to do and spend less time dealing with questionnaires and requests for site visits. But buyers, less so now, but certainly earlier on, were very obsessed with doing things their way. So I think how we're going to evolve is, I think, a recognition across the buying community that we really are all asking for very similar things in the main. And we may label them differently, and we have slightly different taxonomies, and we use different acronyms. But look, we're all asking for the same stuff. And I've got 70 firms that are proof of that. It's just the 71st, 72nd, and so on have to go through that experience before they come and join the community.
And I think that community aspect as well feeds into that appreciation that everybody's on the same page, because the more experiences are shared, the more collaboration there is, and that there is still that perception that everybody's special and got their own way of working. But as we can see with the rise of sort of standards like NIST and SIG and stuff like that, and also solutions solutions such as Helios, we are all asking the same thing. There are opportunities there to be more efficient and effective. So if we sort of look moving forward, there's opportunities. There's going to be increasing challenges. What would you, if people were listening to this and hadn't really dipped their toe into community due diligence and pooled due diligence, apart from obviously picking up the phone and calling you and signing up for Helios, where do you tend to see people start in terms of that journey, in terms of understanding whether pooled due diligence can bring benefits and the role of it? What sort of tactical things could people take away if they wanted to explore this a bit further?
Yeah, okay. Apart from the shameless plug, obviously, I think if you're in a TPR role or you've been set a challenge in procurement to look at this, you should look at yourself from the other side of the fence. Look at yourself as a supplier. So, ask yourself, how many different data requests are we issuing to our supplier right now? And do you really know? And where are they coming from? Because they're probably coming from a good half a dozen different places. Are you asking your suppliers the same stuff in different ways? And if you are, then that's waste. Are you asking for things and then doing nothing with the answer? Is everything you're gathering driving a response? Is there a so what to everything you're getting back? And if you're gathering data but doing nothing with it, why are you asking for it? That's one of the key sort of challenges we have with people. And do you really understand your broader supply base? So we see lots of firms have a really good understanding of their most critical suppliers because regulation's driven that mindset. Correctly, highest risk, biggest impact, 221, 121. You've got to know everything about that cohort. But that could be a tiny fraction of your supply base at the top of your sort of risk pyramid here. The real world does not respect that. COVID did not care that it was taking out your workforce from a whole swathe of your medium risk suppliers because your segmentation wasn't based on how many actual people you had and where they were sitting and the fact they couldn't get to work anymore, or your power blackouts or your cyber risk. So whilst the critical stuff is still the most important, that's why it's critical, the real world will take you down a role where you need to have a broader understanding. So do you really have a proportionate view of the rest of your suppliers? And when was the last time you checked that data as well? So people do a lot of upfront due diligence, but then we have buyers that really struggle to keep on top of that year after year after year. And that's what our community model does. So there's all sort of series of questions. Do you really understand your wider base? Are you on top of them? When was the last time you checked some of these? How do you look to your suppliers? How much stuff are you asking? And what are you really doing with all the data you're getting back? There's also opportunities for removal of waste, removal of effort, and therefore cost. And to my earlier point, I'm pretty sure that all of our buyers are under constant cost pressure and asked to do more for less. So that's where we try and help and give you better coverage for less effort, really.
And I think, and I've said this before, that I truly believe one of the biggest values that TPM and TPRM functions provide is that inventory of data, because depending on what risk angle you're coming at it from, your ESG is focusing on a different set of supply relationships to cyber, to data privacy, to operational resilience, to conduct. And so whilst we all have a number of critical or material relationships, they're not necessarily material critical to everybody else. And then you're quite right, then new regulations are coming through that we need to drive into the fourth parties and the fifth parties, again, from a data perspective, an ESG perspective, an anti-bribery perspective, and things like Ukraine, like Israel, Gaza, like Brexit, like COVID, they don't just impact your material suppliers. You need to look at your aggregate impact. So it's hugely important to have that broad inventory of who you use, what you use them for, how critical it is. But that means you can't focus on just your criticals, but you need to find a way of focusing your resources on them while still covering your options on others.
Yeah, and be proportionate, right? Let's be clear. We don't have to ask everything all of the time. We gather data. For financial services, I think we are about 850 data points now. Most suppliers would probably give us between 300 and 500 answers, say data points. I'm very yes, no's and multi-selects and structured data. You don't have to consume all of that all of the time with the other thing. Where the buyers are all different is in what appetite you have, how you choose to handle each type of risk, and that's your bag, and we're perfectly happy with that. So we work with all of our buyers to see from our bigger set of data which points really matter to you, which answers drive action. might have consequences, and we translate that for you. So you might want to look at 300 data points for your most critical, but for your medium or lower risk, it might be as low as like 20 or 30. The point is, we've got that data. You don't have to go out and get that. You can get straight to the risk appetite overlay and get on with doing the value add work.
Well, one of the things that we like to do on third-party therapy is just understand some of the things that don't go so well. So in your experience, what have you seen people do that you would probably recommend they don't do? What are the learnings that you've seen out there in the industry as you've been going on?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, Mike. I think one thing I would avoid. Well, let's rephrase that. We've seen a number of firms invest a lot of time and energy in the implementation of the latest and greatest end-to-end platform, source to pay, P2P, whatever you want to call it, the technology that will solve everything through workflow and this and that. And the technology is fabulous, right? Some of the stuff out there at the moment is absolutely amazing. But what I've seen is that the technology itself isn't enough. And people need to think very carefully about the cultural change around that, the behaviours you're trying to drive, which are often overlooked. But I guess from my point of view, being at Helios now, I also see these systems being very shiny, empty shells. So you may have a lovely workflow which routes to all the right people and is all very much hooked into your risk process, but you've got nothing in it.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of time and money developing this system, bespoking it to you, dropping it in, launching it, and then realizing you've got to start all over again with your data collection. So we do get buyers coming to us looking to, through our API, plumb in what we've got and give them a leg up, if you like, in terms of data coverage. So the biggest mistake, I guess, and it sounds very, very obvious, but systems and technology are not going to solve your problems. They're just going to give you a shinier problem to grapple with.
Paul, thank you so much. It's been really, really interested, really enjoyed the conversation. There's obviously a lot of activity in this space, and I think if anybody isn't looking at it or considering it, I would definitely encourage folks to at least take a look and consider the opportunity, because I agree, as we move forward, there is value and benefit here. So Paul Huggett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike Day. It's been a pleasure.
And I'll take care. Speak to you soon.
Yeah. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Third Party Therapy. If you like that, why not click on the like button below and subscribe so you get updates in the future, and head over to thirdpartytherapy.com and sign up to our mailing list. Thank you very much.